Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of the Federalist Papers. I've made over 100 videos, and what I really like about this text is you get to see the brilliance of the founding fathers and their rhetoric and, as political commentators and leaders. And you begin to understand the classic Americana mindset, which is dying, but nonetheless, I truly enjoy this wonderful writing because it's the example of the American spirit, one of it, but it's very authentic, and I enjoy that. And I also am a political science major. I'm a total nerd for politics. I don't bring up politics that much on the channel because, YouTube censors it, and I'm already shadow banned, so I don't need to bring the wrath of YouTube on me more. There was a time I actually wanted to be in politics, but now that I'm a Muslim woman, I know that's not allowed. So, until, oh, never mind. I was going to tell a joke, but it doesn't matter. Okay, let's begin. We're on essay number 32. This is an essay by Alexander the Great, okay? Alright, let's begin. Although I am of opinion that there would be no real danger of the consequences which seem to be apprehended to the state governments from a power in the Union to control them and the levies of money, because I am persuaded that the sense of the people, the extreme hazard of provoking the resentments of the state governments, and a conviction of the utility and necessity of local administrations for local purposes, would be a complete barrier against the oppressive use of such a power. Yet I am willing here to allow, in its full extent, the justness of the reasoning which requires that the individual states should possess an independent and uncontrollable authority to raise their own revenues for the supply of their own wants. Okay, so taxes are a way you give revenue to the state. So individual states, they're independent and they get to decide how their taxes should be in order to raise revenues for the things that they want in their state. But don't mix this up with thinking that they don't owe money to the federal government, because every person who has a paycheck sees the federal government takes their cut, and the states do get to borrow from the federal government when they have a natural disaster and stuff like that. In making this concession, I affirm that, with the sole exception of duties on imports and exports, they would, under the plan of the convention, retain the authority in the most absolute and unqualified sense that an attempt on the part of the national government to abridge them in the exercise of it would be a violent assumption of power, unwarranted by any article or clause of its constitution. So notice here, duties on imports and exports. Duties is like taxes, tariffs, all that good stuff. An entire consolidation of the states into one complete national sovereignty would imply an entire subordination of the parts. Subordination of the parts. I want you to think about United States. Subordinate states. Right? Not a confederacy. Not city-states. And whatever powers might remain in them would be altogether dependent on the general will. But as the plan of the convention aims only at the general will, or only at the partial union or consolidation, the state governments would clearly retain all the rights of sovereignty which they before had, and which were not, by the Act, exclusively delegated to the United States. So, states having to retain the rights of sovereignty. This is making me think about how people can criticize what California does with the illegals, with the migrants, right? But I think what's clever about America is if you don't like one state, you can move to another, where it's governed in a different way. How Utah and Florida are governed is going to be different than California and Alabama, right? So you can move around and see which system of government you like. And if you move to every state and you still ain't happy, there's always Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Alaska. I mean, if you're unhappy in Alaska and there's barely anybody there, I mean, maybe it's you, right? This exclusive delegation, or rather this alienation, of state sovereignty would only exist in 3 cases. So, notice here. Alienation, exclusive delegation of state sovereignty. So, first one, where the Constitution in express terms granted an exclusive authority to the Union, where it granted, in one instance, an authority to the Union, and another prohibited the states from exercising the like authority, and where it granted an authority to the Union to which a similar authority in the states would be absolutely and totally contradictory and repugnant. I use these terms to distinguish the last case from another, which may appear to resemble it, but which would, in fact, be essentially different. I mean, where the exercise of a concurrent jurisdiction might be productive of occasional inferences in the policy of any branch of administration, but would not imply any direct contradiction or repugnancy in point of constitutional authority. So we see constitutional authority. I like how he uses the word repugnant a lot, because it's like, oh, it's disgust. These 3 cases of exclusive jurisdiction in the federal government may be exemplified by the following instances. Okay, let's see. The last clause, but one in the 8th section of the first article, provides expressly that Congress shall exercise exclusive legislation over the district to be appropriated as the seat of government. This answers to the first case. The first clause of the same section empowers Congress to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. So here, no matter what, you ain't escaping taxes. Every nation has taxes, so for us, Congress has that duty. At least partial, right? And the second clause of the 10th section of the same article declares that no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imposts or exports, except for the purpose of executing its inspection laws. So inspection laws, hence, would result in exclusive power in the Union to lay duties on imports and exports, with the particular exception mentioned. So he contends that one exclusive power of Congress is to handle duties on imports and exports. But this power is abridged by another clause, which declares that no tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. Because if they did do that, like, imagine if you were mailing a package to Texas and it's like something more, and I guess this extra tax on top, it would be quite horrible. But this power is abridged by another clause, which declares that no tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state, in consequence of which qualification it now only extends to the duties on imports. This answers to the second case. The third will be found in the clause which declares that Congress shall have power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization throughout the United States. So, Congress has a uniform rule of naturalization. This must necessarily be exclusive, because if each state had power to prescribe a distinct rule, there could not be a uniform rule. Ooh. Distinct rule versus uniform rule. A case which may perhaps be thought to resemble the latter, but which is in fact widely different, affects the questions immediately under consideration. I mean the power of imposing taxes on articles other than exports and imports. This, I contend, is manifestly concurrent and co-equally authority in the United States and in the individual states. So again, we're learning the proper phrasing here. United States, you can think of it as a federalized way of thought. When we say individual states, case-by-case basis of each state. There is plainly no expression in the granting clause which makes that power exclusive in the Union. There is no independent clause or sentence which prohibits the states from exercising it. So far as this is from being the case, that a plain and conclusive argument to the contrary is to be deducible from the restraint laid upon the states in relations to duties on imports and exports. Okay, so the restraint laid upon the states in relation to duties and imports and exports. Throughout this, you're seeing a lot about how management should be. It's a fascinating system of federal versus states. Really just goes to show you the nuances of the taxation. This restriction implies an admission that if it were not inserted, the United States would possess the power it excludes, and it implies a further admission that as to all the taxes, the authority of the states remains undiminished. In any other view, it would be both unnecessary and dangerous. It would be unnecessary because if the grant to the Union of the power of laying such duties implied the exclusion of the states, or even their subordination in this particular, there could be no need of such a restriction. So, restrictions. It's very wonderful to think about how states restrict the federal government and how the federal government restricts the states. It would be dangerous because the introduction of it leads directly to the conclusion which has been mentioned, and which, if the reasoning of the objectors be just, could not have been intended. I mean that the states, in all cases to which the restriction did not apply, should have a concurrent power of taxation with the Union. So, a concurrent power of taxation with the Union. The restriction in question amounts to what lawyers call a negative pregnant. Now that's a cool term. That is, a negation of one thing and an affirmance of another. A negation of the authority of the states to impose taxes on imports and exports, and an affirmance of their authority to impose them on all other articles. So this is very cool. Now we just learned a new term here, a negative pregnant. I like that. So you can negate and affirm. This type of way of thinking I saw in Kitab al-Tawheed by Uthaymeen, and he talked a lot about how you can affirm and negate something at the same time when he was talking about La ilaha illallah. Like, I won't get sidetracked, but this reminds me of that. Fascinating. It would be mere sophistry to argue that it was meant to exclude them absolutely from the imposition of taxes of the former kind, and to leave them at liberty to lay others subject to the control of the national legislature. The restraining or prohibitory clause only says that they shall not, without the consent of Congress. Okay, notice this. That's a good caveat. You have to look at the prohibitory clause. That you just need to get Congress to stamp that up to lay such duties. And if we are to understand this in the sense last mentioned, the Constitution would then be made to introduce a formal provision for the sake of a very absurd conclusion, which is that the states, with the consent of the national legislature, might tax imports and exports, and that they might tax every other article unless controlled by the same body. So, controlled by the same body. If this was the intention, why was it not left to the first instance, to what is alleged to be the natural operation of the original clause, conferring a general power of taxation upon the Union? It is evident that this could not have been the intention, and that it will not bear a construction of the kind. So even consent is used in terms of taxation. Wild. As to a supposition of repugnancy, there's that word again, between the power of taxation in the states and in the Union, it cannot be supported in that sense, which would be requisite to work an exclusion of the states. It is indeed possible that a tax might be laid on a particular article by a state, which might render it inexpedient that a further tax should be laid on the same article by the Union. Okay, so on a tax on a particular article makes me think about how there's like a paper bag tax, plastic bag tax. So much taxes on glass bottles. Like, there's just taxes everywhere you turn. But it would not imply a constitutional inability to impose a further tax. The quantity of the imposition, the expediency or inexpediency of an increase on either side, would be mutually questions of prudence, but there would be involved no direct contradiction of power. The particular policy of the national and of the state systems of finance might now and then not exactly coincide, and might require reciprocal forbearances. Notice this, reciprocal forbearances. Now that's a great term. So we learned negative pregnant, reciprocal forbearances, right? Consent of the national legislature in order to have some taxes. Wow. Just such great. See how he introduces such excellent grammar? I wonder how old he was when he wrote this, but I don't think he was like in his 40s. Just look how people talk now. Like just mumbling. It is not, however, a mere possibility of inconvenience in the exercise of powers, but an immediate constitutional repugnancy that can, by implication, alienate and extinguish a pre-existing right of sovereignty. Not about inconvenience, but rather about constitutional repugnancy that alienates and extinguishes sovereignty. The necessity of a concurrent jurisdiction in certain cases, results from the division of the sovereign power. Division of the sovereign power. So the states and the federal government have this sort of very nuanced system of their sovereignty and how they're going to operate with each other. And the rule that all authorities, of which the states are not explicitly divested in favor of the Union, remain with them in full vigor, is not only a theoretical consequence of that division, but is clearly admitted by the whole tenor of the instrument which contains the articles of the proposed Constitution. We therefore find that, notwithstanding the affirmative grants of general authorities, that there has been the most pointed care in those cases where it was deemed improper that the like authorities should reside in the states, to insert negative clauses prohibiting the exercise of them by the states. The 10th section of the first article consists altogether of such provisions that circumstance is a clear indication of the sense of the convention, and furnishes a rule of interpretation out of the body of the act, which justifies the position I have advanced and refutes every hypothesis to the contrary. Publius. MashaAllah, interesting. Okay. Rule furnishes a rule of interpretation out of the act. Very interesting section, I must say. Essay 32 is quite educational, so I just wanted to highlight some of the things. So duties on imports and exports, okay? Individual states possessing an independent and uncontrollable authority to raise their own revenues for the supply of their own wants, but Congress is needed to get their approval, okay, to lay and collect taxes, duties, and imposts and excises. So you need the consent of Congress to lay those imposts and such. There was a clause, though, for inspection laws, all going down to examining duties on imports and exports. We also noticed that there was the uniform rule of naturalization, and then he described the distinct rule, so the relationship between those two. Alright? Talking about constitutional authority, restrictions, consent, what's controlled, negative pregnant, reciprocal forbearances, constitutional repugnancy, sovereign power, concurrent jurisdictions, and furnishing rules of interpretation. Great. Man. You can see why their names live on. You can see because they write in such a way where you just want to keep reading. I don't find them boring at all. And you can tell they were just so well read. You know? They have like an energy in how they write, and I truly enjoy that. They're talking about dry topics, yet when you read it, there's an oomph there that I really enjoy. Hope you learned something. I know I did. This is a great book for political science nerds and history nerds, by the way. And I think you should have it. I think you should buy this text. Alright? If you'd like to join my blog and support the channel, it's www.subscribestor.com/MilahanArchive. Still fundraising for the book holder and the wooden panel. If you'd like to help with that, there's a tip function on the blog, which would really help because I don't want to use a credit card, pay interest. That's not good. And so crowdfunding an educational tool is important and preferable, even if it takes longer. Okay? Take care, family. See you next time.